All right, we are live. It is Hangops for January 9th, 2015. And I've got some interesting topics today. We talk about a thing called Octohost with friend Darren here, and like into automation, containerization, paths, all kinds of good stuff. Why don't we start with Darren? You just kind of introduce yourself, who you
Sure.
are.
My name's Darren Froese. I'm currently with Datadog, who is based in New York. I am, however, based up in the frozen wasteland known as Canada. I'm a site reliability engineer, and yeah, I do a bunch of stuff for them and their infrastructure.
Cool. Um, Maybe to go on a tangent for a second in the beginning, actually. What does a site reliability engineer mean for you folks at Datadog? Because I know like that can mean kind of different things at different places. I'm curious how you've evolved that role.
Hmm. Yeah, good question. I'm not totally sure maybe the official definition, but for me, for what I understand my job to be, it's basically keep the site running and make it better and enable people to build on the infrastructure that we have. So my role over the last 6 months, I've been there almost exactly 6 months, and we've been basically refactoring chef code and tweaking things and making it a lot more testable, a lot easier for people to step in and make changes and be confident that they're going to not break the site. Obviously, that's a bad thing. But yeah, it was we rolled out and changed one-third of our load balancers, and it was a nice non-event. I love it when in a rollout like that is that just it happens and nothing blips. So that's kind of what I would see with what would I do.
Okay. Datadog runs on AWS, right?
We sure do, yeah.
Okay, cool. So that takes care of a lot of the like data center and sort of infrastructure automation for you.
For sure, yeah. We use a ton of like Knife EC2. We use a ton of Chef. That's where we spin down boxes. Today, yeah, I spun up 3 new boxes and killed 3 other boxes. So that was pretty nice.
Okay, so I mean, and now I think it helps that you're a hosted monitoring and metrics company. So
Mhm.
uh, I imagine you're able to dog food your platform
Oh,
uh,
yeah,
for, for
very
for
much
for
so.
for some of that automation, which I feel like is often a big piece of what SRE automation sort of is looked at as like is monitoring his metrics, is giving a platform for that. But
Mhm.
what does like a week, sort of look like for you? Is are you writing chef cookbooks on behalf of developers? Are you working with them to uh, share that ownership, or do you only have like a CI pipeline or a CD pipeline? Are you doing testing? Like, what kind of like automation level or is that stuff at for your team and you?
It's pretty good. A lot of that was there before I came, but we're obviously improving it. We a pretty normal week is setting some priority or what happened last week. Kind of as a team, we talk about what happened last week. What did we ship? What are we working on? And that kind of starts off the week. Tuesday we set this week's priorities after we do some cleanup on Monday, but there's a ton of work around. I do write a lot of chef cookbooks. Lately, it's been a lot more wrapper cookbooks. Deprecating old cookbooks that we may have had and adding some community cookbooks where it makes sense, things like that. The pipeline's pretty nice in that we have a nice staging environment that's very, very close to production, other than scale. And we're still a monolithic repo kind of organization that we haven't made. We write our cookbooks, we test them in Test Kitchen locally, usually on several flavors of Ubuntu to make sure that things are good. Um, Push it into staging, and then immediately once it hits staging, it pushes that out across staging. There's no gaps. There's no waiting for chef to pull. We force a chef run across the environment to make sure that what we've done is good. If it looks good in staging, we give it a few days, and then we roll it into prod. Prod is a little bit different in that we push it through Jenkins, and Jenkins, well, it all goes through Jenkins, sorry, but we push it through, and prod slowly pulls things down rather than kind of rebooting things at once. But it's good. We're adding more testing components. We can catch regressions, things like that. Another one of my tasks is to maybe look and see if we can use Packer better. So that's coming up shortly here. So a lot of chef cookbooks, yeah, a lot of Jenkins, and that's kind of a high-level overview of what it is. Does that answer your question? And I think you might be gone.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, cool.
Things are getting a little scratchy, so I video mute just for help bandwidth. So are you also using Jenkins as sort of like your CD tool, like deployment automation, or is that like a different pipeline?
It does help to kick it off. We have some legacy actual orchestration. Then if the build passes, if everything's cool, it pushes it out that way. So yeah, it is kind of that one tool that orchestrates all of the things for us.
Okay, cool. Well, I think that's an interesting lead-in to what is an open source project that you work on that sort of, I think, seeks to codify and provide an example implementation of some of the patterns for automating like deployment and rollout and automation, all this stuff, which is Octohost.
Mm-hmm.
So could maybe start with a little bit of like the history of how that, or maybe like how about the elevator pitch and then the history of it, and then sort of, whatever you want to share about it.
Sure. The in 5 seconds or less, it's a mini pass for you to be able, and that's, I saw Docker in September of 2013, and I thought, this is pretty cool. Like, in my previous job, we hosted for a number of our clients, and we built sites for a number of clients, and so always finding the proper way to deploy something was a pain, right? So, we were a Ruby shop, so if you had, should we use Passenger? Which app server should we use? Should we use Puma, Unicorn? How should we start it? Should it be behind Nginx? And it was kind of, there's a lot of different patterns there, and I saw Docker, at least for us, a way to streamline and simplify those patterns of deploying websites. So in November of that year, we had a need websites easily, quickly, and without any human intervention. Well, other than deploying of the code, but nobody to set up an Apache virtual host, nobody to set up folders, nobody to set up permissions, anything like that. So November of that year, I started building Octohost, and I'd had a look around kind of the area at what was there, and I saw something called Doku, and I thought Doku was pretty amazing. It did pretty much everything that I wanted to do, but I didn't understand it well enough, and I didn't understand the pieces, and I wanted to understand how it all fit together. So I took a stab at implementing that. That's why I took a stab at implementing and building Octohost. Within about a month or so, I had a kind of a prototype, and I've been refining it ever since. Basically, what I wanted and what I still want is an easy single node, kind of duplication of Heroku. Obviously, without all the high availability, without all the amazing things that Heroku does. But I have about 20 websites that I run for various things. They're written in all sorts of different languages. So I wanted to deploy them to one place, and I didn't want to pay an arm and a leg, one site on one VM. And this seemed to be the best way to do it. So that's pretty much the origins of it.
So now, over time, I imagine you've involved some of the tooling around what you've been using, right?
Totally. uh, as always, what you write at first gets thrown out, and if you when I look back on some of that code, it's interesting and very naive. Um, Originally, it was very much just a Docker clone, just kind of push it out and spin up a site, spin up a container. Early on, I really wanted to add environment variables, which are an amazing feature of Heroku as well. And so I used etcd from the CoreOS project as a backing store for that. As time went on and as they were going through some of their growing pains and rewriting it and doing some things, I saw console and I thought, the service checks and just the way that console worked might be a better fit. So I ripped out the etcd parts and added console in instead. And so console is just in that case was a backing store for KV data as well as a place to register services so that that I can use some of the more dynamic parts of kind of a site generation. I'm in the process of, and I was hoping to have it done today, I was in the process of launching a new version of OctaHost, which uses the 1.4 version of Docker. But I found a little showstopper late last night, early this morning. So I'm integrating console template, and I've just kind of come up with either my implementation or something going on. So it's been a personal playground, a way for me to understand newer technologies as well as to adjust what makes sense, when it makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I think that that's kind of it's a cool side project, but it also seems like it's a lot of work. It's sort of interesting, like figuring out how much of the yak you want to shave. And
totally,
there's a lot in there.
It could probably be more work if I had loftier goals, but I think honestly, on the higher end of things, once you get past a single pass or a single box, which can scale pretty high already, I think there's some great projects that are already doing it. Is a great project that I think has a huge head start, and obviously they have way more developers on it, and they have a great product. So I think keeping it the size that and just for the purpose that it is has helped me to scale back from going crazy on building it. And honestly, just in my SRE role, I want things to be reliable. So I'm trying to keep the goals and the focus quite small and just keep it reliable so I don't have to worry about it too much. Our last production OctaHost box, it ran for 90 days without a hassle, without a problem. So it's a little slower of a refresh than I'm used to at Datadog, where a simple way to deploy websites, and it seems to work pretty well so far.
Are you
Listen here, all of you, pull out your wallets and give me the money, and no one gets hurt.
Okay, fair enough.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
We've had a number of drive-bys in the 2.5 years I've been doing Hangops now, but that's the first one of that. Usually it's either like someone singing or just yelling, but
well, you do live in LA, so
I guess, yeah. It's like hand over your Bitcoin wallet private keys and no one gets hurt. Just hold up those QR codes.
Totally.
I was going to ask, are you using Heroku build packs for like the framework support?
You know what? That was one of the reasons I didn't go with Daku. I like Heroku build packs. They're great. I've used, I've forked a few and adjusted them, but I wanted to use like a full-on Docker like start stop. I wanted to use Docker files because Docker files are real simple. Right? I wanted to build them ways that maybe didn't need to be so complicated. So I didn't. I skipped out on that one.
Okay, cool. So then, how many? So I guess you're maintaining quite a few Docker files then as part of the project.
I am in our GitHub organization. There's 15 or so languages that are supported, kind of, that I have build packs. I have Docker images for, so they probably need a little bit of love. I'm still on 2.1 for Ruby, and I should probably be up at 2.15. But yeah, there's quite a few. But I built them off of as much as I could. I built them off of a good base, a good solid base. So you don't have to update them too often. But as I'm looking at it now, that's definitely where I should probably spend some time cleaning up. I've been pretty busy the last 6 months learning and adjusting to my new role at Datadog. So this hasn't been got.
Interesting. So what would you say? How much are you trying to like? I think what's the way I'm trying to put this? And Jesse or Paul, if either of you have questions, please jump in.
All right, I'll jump in and give you a chance to think.
Yeah.
Sure. How much of the kind of 12-factor workflow are you trying to build into this? Like I noticed it looks like you're allowing the user to just use their own Docker files. So in I guess the build, release, run sort of factor in 12-factor, the release talks about taking the build artifact and adding configuration options, marking it as a version, and then running it. Are you doing that release step, or are you just saying put all your configuration into your Docker file and that's it?
No, I have a command that's called octo-config, which basically works the same as Heroku config, where you set a key and a value, and then during the run process of Docker, so after you git push and it builds the container, when it starts to run, it looks into the backing store and goes, hey, what are all the keys and values for this container, and then it kind of injects it into the run process so that it's available there. I didn't want to have environment variables inside of the Docker file. Kind of feels like it defeats the purpose. And you can run it on a local backing store with different config vars, and then push the same thing to your production box. There's also so I've been trying to build and maintain at least an AMI as well as a Vagrant box. And the Vagrant box is a way just to push it locally to double check to make sure things are good. And then all I wanted was to change your Git target and push to production, and not have to worry about, oh no, someone committed the local MySQL instance, or things like that. So I'm trying to go as close to 12-factor as I can. Obviously, as I'm looking at the 12-factor list, I'm missing a few things, but that's kind of the goal.
Yeah, I mean it's like a religion, right? You only take the bits you want and ignore the rest.
Absolutely. But yeah, the code base tracked in version control. Your dependencies are you're defined in your code base or in your Docker file. So yeah, as much as possible.
Cool. And do you have a load balancing layer?
There is in front of everything. There is OpenResty, and I'm not using any Lua bits right now. I used to be, but I've refactored that out as well, and we're just using OpenResty. And you can spin up as many containers as you want, and then Nginx will balance that. Really, for the scale of many of the sites that are going to run on here, you don't need more than one container. When I was doing some benchmarking tests and trying to figure out I originally used .cloud, so the old Doc had a Hitachi, which was a Node.js load balancer, which was in front of everything. And I originally used that, and I was having some scaling problems, which are definitely not .cloud's fault. It was probably just I was doing something stupid. And during that time when I was working through refactoring that out, you can get an Nginx instance to hit 8,000 requests a second in a container on this. So that's already a pretty heavy and big site. So if you need more than that, then you can spin up more containers, but obviously you'll be limited by your CPU or whatever.
Right.
So there is a definitely a layer there. Part of what I've been trying to add with console lately, over Christmas time, right, the Nginx templates, Nginx configuration files, based on the service data. So if I had a container that, for whatever reason, crashed, I want it to be taken out of the Nginx config. And I have that mostly running. I just like I said, need to tweak the one bug I found last night.
Right. And is that with having Lua like talk directly to console and rewrite itself, or are you using like conf or something to rewrite the config files?
I'm using console template to pull the service data out of console to rewrite the config files. So I have a multi-step process where the original config files get placed when the config container is first pushed, and then those config files, which have a few kind of variables inserted, are then a change in the service data. So whenever a service gets registered with console, then console template takes a look at it and goes, oh, hey, cool, and it rewrites the config file. So I'm using console watches to handle that. And there's a blog post. I don't think it's linked to from the main site, but on my blog there's a blog post about how we're using some watches in OctoHost to again keep some of that stuff where probably it belongs, rather than doing everything manually and then kind of freaking out when you're not running the process, to have console watch that space and then adjust as needed.
So it seems like the scope of this is very focused on, like, I have maybe a VPS or a small EC2 instance, kind of I'm doing my own almost like shared hosting kind of stuff. Is that sort of the scope of where people would want to use it?
Kind of the scope, like, so we're using it at Datadog in a small capacity. We're using it to run those little websites or those little web tools that really I don't want to dedicate an entire box to, because it requires this version of Python or it requires this version of Ruby. It's just a way to, like, it's really web focused. That was my goal from the beginning. And so yeah, so if someone wants to spin up a small DigitalOcean box or even a medium-sized box, this is a way to launch them without fear of dependency hell. Right now on our production OctoHost that I have most of the demo sites running on, we have about 60 containers running. It's on an M3 medium. I think it's on an M3 medium. All 60 sites, and 4 different versions of Ruby and 2 different versions of Python, and we have Apache, we have Nginx, we have anything. So whatever you need, it can run it in that capacity, and it does quite well. So yeah, I'm not looking to scale up at this point to solve bigger issues with this project, because I think those are already done much better than me at this point. And that those would be things like Deus and using something like totally forgetting the name right now, Marathon on Mesos would be, those kinds of projects would be what I would look at if I needed to go, bigger scale right at this point.
Yeah. Well, have you thought, as like the networking piece evolves a little more, like with Docker folks are doing some stuff, there's things like Weave and Socket Plane, maybe integrating one of those just to sort of be able to be like, say, like, oh, I can have 3 instances, like,
yeah,
horizontally scaling a little bit.
Yeah, I have actually done at 2 or 3 different stages in the process. I have built out an OctoHost cluster. I like the word octo apparently, but I have experimented with having multiple boxes doing the same kind of thing. I think I'm in a very good state right now with the way console's working in order to do that. I just think that the placement of the containers would be pretty naive at this moment, and that container scheduling and stuff is kind of a very hard part. I've been looking at Weave and the Rancher. I think his name, the project's called Rancher.io now, and there's some just haven't tackled it at the moment. I haven't had the need.
Yeah, that makes sense. But also, I think if you're keeping the scope of Octohost, at like this is like single box sort of, you can really do you can have a lot of fun within that.
Mm-hmm. I haven't, like, the project I originally built it for hasn't happened. So the project that it was originally for, this was the back end. The front end has been like 80-90% closed for a year, and that the company that was working on it has really had to focus on other things. And so I was still keeping it for them. Obviously, if that worked out and we needed to scale, then that would have been to keep it so that you could do that, right? You don't have config on one machine that hasn't been pushed to another. There's an option in Octohost to automatically push to a Docker registry after a successful build and launch. So, again, that was some stuff that I had built in, that I had most of the pieces out. I think even not this year, but last year's the Christmas ops, Advent. I wrote an article about using Surf to when Surfdom was around before console, using Surf to kind of pull things back and forth from box to box in a kind of a multi-box way. So yeah, it's there. It just needs someone who really there.
Interesting. What about like monitoring and metrics? Have you built anything in with that? Or, is there Octo command to see like the state of containers and stuff? Like what?
There's like an Octo status, which takes a look at the information inside console services and gives you kind of a green or a red. Monitoring wise, I have a few different containers that forward logs. I've used, like everything else, I like a lot of things. I've used a bunch of stuff from Program. So Jeff Lindsay, he built a container, and so I've used that to forward all the logs to Papertrail. As far as metrics go, I've used Datadog to do metrics outside of the containers and to watch containers here and there. But I haven't worried a lot about internal metrics inside. And there's definitely some areas where I could use some metrics in the Nginx front end that's doing all of the actual load balancing and things. That could definitely use some. But other than that, I've just kept it, again, quite simple. The scale that I'm using it at personally, and that most people I know are using it at, is fairly simple, I guess, in that regard.
Yeah.
There's a great container that I think came out of Google called Container Advisor or CADvisor, and it does a really good job of collecting all the metrics of your containers, and it's got a really small, simple web UI and an API to it. And that's
cool.
Super useful. You just run one on each server that you're running containers on, and it collects all the metrics from inside the containers. And I think they have another app that you can roll all the metrics up to, so you can get like a global view as well.
Cool. I'll take a look at that.
It's very similar to Logspout in that it's like ridiculously simple to use. You just run it and you mount a socket through or something, and then a bunch of magic shit happens and it works.
That's cool. Yeah, I like it when that magic stuff happens.
There's actually a pull request open now by Michael, my coworker, to add like a Docker stats command. It's pretty cool. You can like build the binary from the pull request and play around with it. We were like messing with it yesterday.
Oh, cool. I think I saw something like that. It's in the doc. Is it in the Doctor repo?
It's in yeah, Docker. It's pull request number. Sorry, I'm trying to find it. 9984. It's like
Cool.
adding a Docker stats command. It looks cool. It does basically the same thing as the Google one. It adds like it reads the C group's stats.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it looks like Cat Advisor supports influx. So you could maybe, like, with a little work, you could add, like, optionally, like, someone could spin up, like, a Cat Advisor container, and then maybe a container with, like, influx and Grafana running in it. And then you'd have, like, you know, and you could have a little fun with that pretty quick.
I've done that. It, like, just doesn't, if you, I left it running for, like, a few months, and since I have so many containers, influx got so slow. But other than that, it's really cool.
Cool.
Yeah, I've been working on building out some tooling around that. I've got an elk stack that kind of magically configs itself up using etcd to pass configs around and stuff like that. And then my next step was, and I have logspout then just spits to that, and it all works. And my next step, I was looking at influx and Grafana, but I haven't gotten very far with that because I have to actually learn influx before I try and use it.
That sounds cool. You know, I should totally look at doing that. I spent Christmas working on, well, I spent some time off at Christmas working on the console template stuff because I wanted to integrate that. But the monitoring part is a bit open at the moment. If I could get a stats D output, that would be awesome. I know at Datadog we have a little stats D daemon, so we end up sending a ton of stuff to that. So again, another way to very easily get metrics out.
So that maybe leads to another question, which I'll preface this with. I think when you're doing, especially like ops, which, you know, this ops sort of focus to Hangops. It's just sort of, that's the way it's evolved. I think often this comes naturally when folks kind of do a lot of like sysadmin opsy type stuff where you have a lot of side projects and you run your own things. But if you don't, I think it can be really valuable to sort of be involved in something, whether it's like open source or, like, you know, have a couple friends that do volunteer system administration for the Python Software Foundation. You know, there's sort of different degrees of which you can, like, do that, but having, like, things that are like you can kind of play a little more. It's not as production as like work, and maybe it's also like a little different from work is good. So in light of that, maybe if, you know, folks that are listening or hear this later and don't have a good project, and maybe this one sounds interesting, how can people get involved, and what is the community like right now?
Well, in all honesty, the community is pretty small. The community is pretty much me and some random patches from people here and there. I didn't put any tracking stuff in it, so I don't really know how many instances are being used. But if you go to the Octohost website, there's links to as many things as I can find. There's links to all the build packs. There's links to it. I know there's probably, and I got a complaint the other day that someone downloaded it and they couldn't figure out how to build, and immediately I looked and I'm like, you know what, you're right. I didn't put when they needed to do a bundle install, and for a Ruby guy like me, that was, you know, second nature. But for someone who wasn't as familiar with Ruby, they didn't know, and they got really frustrated really quickly. So, you know, those kind of things are good in that it reminds me that I need to be better in my documentation. So if someone, you know, if you go to the Octohost site, give it a try and send me either an issue or a pull request, and I'm glad to fix. You mentioned earlier about open source things being either great outlets or great learning tools. Honestly, a ton of this stuff, you know, while we're not using Octohost for a production environment at Datadog, we're using a ton of the things that I've learned in order to use, you know, console. We're looking at rolling out things like console in this that just apply other ways. So it's been really good that way professionally, to try new technologies, to see where the pain points are, and then to find a way to use them where they make sense. So yeah, I'm open to pull requests. You know, anytime.
But what is there like specific things like maybe like someone would be gung ho about coming in like I mentioned a minute ago, like coming in and maybe like some stats D or influx DB support
Yeah.
or like databases, like what are some of the things like you just big chunks that you'd love some help with?
Sure. One pain point has always been persisting data Octahost as very much kind of destroyable and disposable. So I have kind of shied away from persisting data in local containers. I wrote a small plugin that can connect to a MySQL box and kind of create databases and then take those config variables for username and password and then inject them back into the backing store, so back into console, so that you would keep you'd have your Octohost here and you'd have your database box here, and then when you want a database, it's a simple octo command that then keeps all the data over there, but has all the config variables over here in console. Again, just trying to keep state. Or another thing I've been looking at was Fig, since the Orchard guys got bought by Docker, and Fig appears to be the way that there's orchestration is going to go. Maybe taking a look at integrating Fig support. So if there's a fig.yml file in the repo, it could do some orchestration that way and spinning up other boxes. So multi-box would definitely be a thing to take a stab at. I think once this next release comes out, we're in a really, really good state to get there. And that should be in the next couple of days as I figure out this last little showstopper. Yeah, really, it's kind of scratch your own itch. What do you need? There's a couple people that mount from the local box, and while that scares me a ton, and there's a reason that's not in the Docker file, they sent over support, and it now folded in, so now they can mount from the local box. So yeah, no reasonable patch is turned away. I'm not too much of a syntax, Nazi, I guess would be the not great word, but yeah, it's I'm open to anything.
Under the hood, what's sort of the glue?
Really Bash is the glue. Jeff Lindsay, he wrote something called Git Receive. So I've been the Git push, and that builds the containers. And then I've been pulling a lot of stuff out of that and putting it into the octo command. The octo command is really just a bash script that does that kind of that orchestration, the building, the config var injection, the things like that. So it could stand to be refactored a bit, I'm sure. So that's another place where I could use some help. And I've been leveling up my bash foo as I've been building it, and so now I'm at the point where I look at some of the older stuff and cry a little bit inside. So definitely some of that stuff could be improved and done more efficiently or more concisely. But any of those areas. So bash really glues that together in front of Docker with console as a backing store, and that's really the infrastructure now.
Interesting. I noticed, it seems like you've been able to put some time into there's a logo and some branding, and you're running some instances and doing builds and stuff. Is that all stuff that you've just funded, or have you been able to get some sponsorship? Or that's one of those sides of open source projects I'm always interested in, when they have all the design and branding and stuff, and I'm like, what?
Yeah. My mean-looking octopus. Yeah, he. I worked at a well, I own half of a graphic design company, the company I worked at for 12 years, and so I thought it would be as for one of the designers that we had in at the time, and I said, hey, if you're bored, if you've got a moment and you want to design, something, an octopus, throwing around shipping containers, give it a shot. So
Okay.
I wanted to have a real URL rather than a GitHub URL. I wanted to have something where people could come to and really see that this was a project. Um, for the time being, we have been, Nonfiction, the company I was with for 12 years, they've been donating the AWS box and that kind of stuff. So at this point, that's where it is. I may end up moving it to DigitalOcean and to save some cost that ways, but we'll see. But yeah, I felt it was important to have a site, and I just wanted it to not be one kind of.
No, I think that sort of branding and marketing aspect is really important, right? Like we've seen the last couple of years, even like Heartbleed, right? Had a really good site, had a good logo, like, and people paid attention.
Yeah, yeah. It's like working at a design company for so long, I can appreciate great design, but I end up just pushing stuff that sometimes looks terrible, and I wanted this to not look terrible. So thanks to who was it that developed it? Oh, thanks to Gary at Nonfiction for developing that logo. It was great.
Yeah, I think in a way it's part of the onboarding UX a little bit. It's like, is there a decent site? Is it navigable? Is there some good documentation? Like you maintain a nice change log that I see. You've got a GitHub account, right? You put builds on the Docker, the registry. Like there's like some ancillary stuff that you seem to be doing that sort of, it almost seems like it's all like UX oriented.
Well, I just wanted to make it easy for people to see what was happening, right? Like reading Git logs isn't the best way to see what actually changed. And there's lots of Git commits that are maybe just cleanup that you don't really need to see other than, updated to console 0.41, right? So I wanted to make it easy for people to get in. Unfortunately, the one thing that's hard is doing Chef. Well, maybe not. It's not Chef, but the ecosystem around a Packer Chef Ruby build is pretty complicated, and so make that simpler. Actually, here would be another thing that people could help with. I wanted to make a container or something where I could build things for people. Like, okay, here's your AWS number, or here's your AWS key ID. Build me an Octohost, rather than, hey, install Ruby, bundle install, install Packer, make sure you have all the environment variables. Like there's a lot of steps involved. So kind of making the onboard process may help. I know Doku had a very simple, it was a curl to bash. And I saw at DigitalOcean, they also had a very simple place you could just enter a bunch of information and they'd create you a Doku instance. So that would be awesome. Then I think probably more people would give it a try because the barrier to entry would be better.
Yeah. So what other open source stuff are you, or not open source, but like what other like services are you using and that maybe you're able to use because it is an open source project that sort of, help you? Like I think I saw Worker Badge or
yeah,
right?
So
in one of the repos.
I was using Travis CI to do some builds until there was a big change, and unfortunately I haven't gone back and fixed my build, even though it all works. I've been using I used Worker a little bit. I used Worker to try out automatic building of repos. So there was one repo where when I pushed to it, it would automatically build an AMI for me, and then kick that out. So I've been wanting to do more, but again, just been doing a lot of stuff. It did it per se, so I just haven't had the time. What else? I think those are most of it. Wherever possible, I've been using Octohost to host all the components that I need, as much, obviously. yeah, I think those are the most of the open source stuff that I've used, other than the tooling underneath the hood, which is console and Nginx and that.
Cool. Well, I think this is really cool, and it's interesting to see like what you've kind of chosen to encapsulate and not. There's a project from Alex Payne called Sovereign, which I've always thought is interesting. It's the set of Ansible playbooks that it's evolved over time, and the idea is sort of like you get yourself a DigitalOcean VPS or a Linode or even a physical server, but like one box, and you can run Ansible against it and get like all the like cloudy type things you might want, but privately. So it's like it's its own cloud, which gives you some like Google Docs and calendaring and contact sync and some Dropbox type stuff, and it can install like a mail server, and it sets up like SMTP and IMAP and POP and self-signed SSL and OpenVPN, and it makes it like pretty easy to like sort of get off of like using Google, using like hosted productivity, like all the Google Apps type stuff and some of the other services you might pay for, and you can roll your own. And I thought it might be interesting to like take that sort of it's like I want to explore self-hosting everything, right? And that's becoming, I think, more and more of a thing with
absolutely
NSA stuff and Snowden and all these reveals that are happening. But I thought it might be interesting to sort of take that approach to like say all the infrastructure of like a SaaS company, like sort of in all the levels of like, but like in that approach of like everything's open source, everything's automated. Of like, okay, I want to self-host all my stuff, so I'm going to start with like what's on the bottom of that, right? It's like DNS, mail, like maybe LDAP, like configuration management, logging, monitoring, and then building like on top of that to then like, all right, maybe running like GitLab, that means like Postgres and Redis and Nginx and and then like whatever layer for like, all right, maybe we're writing a Django application, and that needs like Memcache. Sort of like layering on the layers of infrastructure in an open source way. Maybe trying to incorporate like using Docker and Console and some of these tools, but sort of that like an example of what would this look like if I want to self-host all of that infrastructure and really like own that availability. And like start with the infrastructure pieces, metrics, monitoring, logging, like getting like Logstash, Graphite, Grafana, Sensu, like all those roles like at the base, and then the like productivity stuff and like the web application, web development, and kind of like sort of layer it all on.
Yeah, I think Docker is one of the is a key component to that, or maybe the Rocket guys would point towards that, but just having those containers. I know running the nonfiction. I've been running a box since 2002, and finally today it got turned off. And the reason it hadn't been upgraded is because of dependency hell, right? And the reason that it took so long to move things off was dependency hell. So I think Docker really is an amazing technology that can help to fix that, where just throw it on another box. It doesn't matter because it's all Docker, right? Docker, 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 as it were. And I see your shirt and good work. But no, I think the sovereign code actually was one of the things that helped me. The original Octohost was built using Ansible. I wanted to learn Ansible, and so I just built it with that as testing. So I went over to do better testing through Chef. So open source projects are a great way to learn all sorts of new stuff.
Definitely. Well, and I've been mulling over how feasible it would be to sort of do the like something sovereign-like, but for like sort of a somewhat opinionated picture of a highly available like web infrastructure stack. But encapsulating what are all the things that you need. Like you need CI, right, and CD and APIs. So like maybe it's like drone, right? It's like a CI server written in Go. It's a little smaller. Influx, maybe like also like incorporating some of the newer projects as a way to learn, but like how much time and effort would that take to stand all up? And I don't know.
The whole pipeline thing is interesting that way because when you look at it, you're like, well, I'm supposed to do this, right? This is the good practice, but starting off from nothing is super hard, right? Like that's where I like things like Worker that have kind of taken a lot of that intermediates or some of that stuff and really simplified it, right? But yeah, standing up an entire stack like that. The yak shaving and the bike shedding would be immense.
Yeah. Well, I feel like that's a part where there's not a lot of great examples.
You're right.
Like, there's a lot of really good hosted stuff and the small scale, but then at some point you want to customize it, or there's some economy of scale that makes sense to bring that in house at some point.
Have you looked at Stackstorm at all?
A little bit. We did Hangops with them last December, I think, early December. And there was some interesting stuff there, but in and of itself, there's a bunch of stuff you have to run to deploy it.
True. Yeah.
So like, there's yak shaves. But I do feel like there isn't maybe that middle ground. I think that's a lot of where people really do reinvent the wheel, and often when they're in the middle of like, oh, you know what, we're going to stand up Jenkins and bring this in house because we need to like. We want to start doing Android builds and iOS builds and this and that, and we suddenly don't want to pay for like 17 services or something, or we hired a RelEng dude and he wants to run it all, like, or a RelEng gal or a RelEng whoever. But there's like that middle phase, and that's often I think where you're mostly time crunched.
Yeah.
And so that's where it leads to like there's the least amount of time to share. So if you could try to build some of that stuff not under the gun of like, oh my gosh, our Travis builds are failing, and you know what I mean, like, or like we need this thing and we can't seem to find a way to pay for it, so let's just try to build it, or I don't know. But there's, it's like I feel like I've seen a lot of orgs do that weird in between, and that knowledge never gets shared. That wheel just gets half rebuilt.
Yeah, sorry, someone's talking.
No, I'm done.
Oh no, sorry. Yeah, like I think a lot of that stuff is just these janky shell scripts that just live on kind of forever, right? And it's kind of sad because we do keep reinventing it a lot, or it doesn't happen, right? That's and a lot of because it was too hard, and like you said, that kind of getting started, that hump was hard, and then deploying everything. I don't know. I'm of the mind a lot of times where if it's not a core competency, if it's not something you need to run, then don't run it. Then try to push that out as much as you can until you need to run it. And when you need to run it, you'll know the bottlenecks, you'll know the things that are frustrating to your team, and then you can pick the right thing rather than, well, everyone uses Jenkins, and so let's use that. No, maybe you could use something else, something better, something less frustrating. I don't know. But yeah, that's kind of. I agree that there are very few good examples, and it is hard to start.
Yeah. And part of that too is I've thought like trying to do it in like start with like the applying software development to infrastructure as code. So I'm curious. I know you maintain a set of cookbooks for HoctoHost. Do those have like chef spec, server spec? You're running through stuff through Test Kitchen. You kind of doing all that like sort of best practicey type testing and stuff.
I do. I try to do most of the best practices, other than having them builds fail for months at a time, which is terrible. But yeah, time. My preferred method of testing is honestly server spec. I love it because I know if it actually got installed. I have used chef spec through many various incarnations of 3 and 4 and 4.1 and 4, like all the times it's been incremented lately. I am stuck. I don't know. I just love the server spec. What was installed? Is this file here? Because really, that's all I care about. I don't care about is it in the chef in the proper way, maybe, but I'm probably not drinking enough chef Kool-Aid, and Mike is watching this and will probably roundly smack me afterwards. But But yeah, I love the server spec, and I try to do as much of it as I can.
Okay, cool. Well, I think that's a therein is an interesting like opportunity of working on something open source like this, right? Is it's like maybe you're like, I don't understand. Like maybe like I get I use Chef or Puppet, but like what do you mean like testing? Like like I'm gonna run like continuous in a CI what? Um, Something like this might be an opportunity to like see like a small working example and contribute or play with something that's like you don't have to try to retrofit it on top of your like existing uh, work stuff that maybe doesn't have any of that.
Mm-hmm.
And get some practice with like doing some testing and
Totally. I like really these cookbooks were the ones where I taught myself how to do chef testing, and I read as much as I could online, and I followed the tutorials, and I ripped off other people's cookbooks and looked through them. This was really where I figured most of that out. I've wanted for a while. I want one of my ideas was, hey, every time there's a commit, build the whole thing from scratch and move all the sites over and deploy it, and basically be running either blue green or like every push to master is a new build, and if we fail, it rolls back, and if not,
yeah.
But
Not yet.
But yeah, at some point, maybe.
Well, that's the fun part too, right? Is you can layer on. You can be as ambitious or minimalistic as your free time entails, and at the end of the day, this is probably a better, for some definition, a better use of time than maybe like Reddit. So.
Well, yeah, or just sitting around watching TV, or yeah, I like. I don't know. I like working. I like learning new stuff. If I'm not learning new stuff, I'm a sad panda, and that's a lot of the reason why I left my last job. So, this keeps my brain happy.
Paul, anything to add? You've been quiet.
No, I think I think that's an interesting discussion about the like doing chef and all the testing and stuff. I don't think we've had that discussion in a while, so it might be worth redoing. One thing I would add to what you were saying is, you said you can be as ambitious as you want. Don't be too ambitious, otherwise you never actually get anything done.
Totally.
Like just pick like one thing and figure that out. When I was learning chef, I was learning chef to install OpenStack, and I decided to try and learn everything at once. So I'm like learning Chef, I'm learning Chef spec, I'm learning server spec, I'm learning OpenStack, and it was a nightmare. I spent a long time of not being productive because I was trying to learn too many things at once. And so definitely I learned from that. Just like start really simple. Like I should have just learned Chef or just learned OpenStack rather than trying to do it all at once.
Yeah, OpenStack is a lot to take on, but I will say a decent amount of my time, and I'm look at about 8 months now, has been spent with learning Kafka and Zookeeper and working on our wrapper cookbooks and trying to contribute back to the upstream cookbooks that we're wrapping. I don't know if I used the term wrapper right, but that's what I think of as like it's like our local customizations of an upstream Zookeeper cookbook and things.
Mm-hmm.
So with the Zookeeper Kafka, and I feel like I've really learned a lot about how those are put together by working on an example of how to automate deploying and running them, and how to monitor and automate monitoring them. So I think that's actually something I was reflecting on the other day of like I think it's actually like a really good way to learn like a piece of software could be to try to write config management code for it, like a recipe, or a cookbook, a module, a playbook, like whatever your preferred config management tool is. But like dig through the community one, or maybe just like start writing one from scratch, just to play, or really try to wrap it. But like that, like whatever degree of that you want to take on, but that for me I think is really like been a really powerful way to actually learn how it works, is trying to automate installing it and making it work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the best way to understand it from an ops perspective as to what are the things that I need to run this, and can I do it in an automated and repeatable way? And I really want to play with it, I'll take that, pull that apart, and put that into a chef cookbook so that I actually know what's happening rather than, well, I think, well, it just Bash does it, right? This way I understand, A, how it's being installed and what are all the pieces. So done that, for lots of stuff that came out and like, you know what, that scares me. Let's try doing it this way.
Yeah, definitely. But I think there is something in that you don't get from watching a talk or some slides or even reading the docs or doing the quick start. Like something about like trying to automate making it work yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Write that cookbook, write that Puppet module, that Ansible playbook, like, and then I'm not quite at the point yet where we're doing a lot of tests, but that's one of the next big things I want to is really do a lot more server spec. And I feel like starting with server spec is going to be easier as more of a do it 5.sh ops kind of a person background,
Totally.
more than a unit testing software development background. That to me is my next big horizon that's going to add that much more because then I'm verifying the behavior, right? I'm verifying that it did what I want. And then that I'm going to codify the correct behavior of it, and I have to learn that by trial and error.
Mm-hmm. Totally. I just upgraded an entire subsystem at Datadog, and we went from one version of Ubuntu to another, and I did that all with server spec, and it was trivial. It took me less than a day to get all the chef done, and it's a fairly complicated chef recipe as far as the server spec, and having the test there really gave me the confidence to just let's upgrade to this new version. Let's try it. Cool. In production or in staging the next day, and everything went off without a hitch. So that testing can really give you that confidence, right? And for me, it's the server spec stuff. Other people like the chef spec because of the speed, but that's kind of my sweet spot.
Awesome.
On the server spec, there's also a pretty good Sensu plugin for running server spec and basically alerting or whatever off failures. And so you can not just test your cookbook with it, but actually test your infrastructure with it and send alerts through PagerDuty or whatever based on it. So it can be really useful for the life cycle management of your servers as well as your development of the code.
Yeah.
Totally.
Well, I was mulling over the other day too, the idea of like either server spec or Cucumber tests, depending on like what you're testing, as console health checks.
Mm-hmm.
Like that idea of like you're having your integration tests be rolled up into your monitoring has been on my mind for a few years. But like with console, using that more and more and having the console health checks, like rolling your tests into that. Interesting.
There's a ton of things.
I wonder if that might be a bit heavy for that. Sorry.
No, go for it.
I was just saying it might be a little bit heavy for that. Like I like the console and etcd where you're really just saying, is the port open? Yes. No, kind of thing. Whereas I think a lot more than that, you're probably testing too much for something as simple as a service registry.
Yeah.
That's opinion.
Maybe.
It's probably a future topic is going beyond the curl pipe grep style monitoring or the port, telnet to the port style monitoring.
Totally. Netcat.
Crit, warn, fail. Okay. Agios pants status, crit.
Totally.
Cool. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. It's been really good. So people want to know about Octohost, right? It's octohost.io or github.com/octohost.
Yep, you bet.
And if people want
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, if people want to know more about you, or like you said, you made a personal blog post on what you're doing, console watches for Octohost, where can they find you?
It's at blog.froze.org, or if you take a look at my GitHub profile, which is all over the entire Octohost organization, then there's links to the blog there. But yeah, if there are other things that are in my brain that I have a long list of things I want to do, But again, if someone has a need or an itch to scratch, then go for it. I love contributions.
What about Twitter? Where can I find you on Twitter?
Twitter.com/Darren, my first name.
Cool. Awesome.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you for your time. Have a good weekend.
Okay, take care.